could I use this method in another context? Because VBI has been developed for IT technology, for software or perhaps hardware, but for IT. And cultivated meat is not IT. So it's quite a different technology and also different kinds of players. And I thought, well, let's try.
Ethical Tech Innovation, a value-based engineering podcast. Hello and welcome to Ethical Tech Innovation, a value-based engineering podcast. Today I'm joined by Lukas Madl, founder and CEO of Innovethic.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, thank you for joining me. So today I'd like to ask you about value-based engineering analysis you did of cultivated meats.
Right.
So first of all, could you explain to listeners what cultivated meats are?
Sure. Cultivated meat is what you more frequently in the media you would read, for example, in vitro meat or lab meat or something like that. It means that you can grow kind of meat cells which you can take from an animal.
Why do you decide to do a VB analysis of this?
When we started the project, I had not been in touch with VBI then, and so I had a kind of a clear picture what we would do in ethical impact assessments and looking at the different stakeholders and looking at what are the potential benefits and risks. And we described this, of course, in the project plan. But then I got into the topic of VBI and I thought, well, it fits quite well what we are doing in the project and has a lot of substantial additional considerations and views on it. And actually, I was excited. Could I use this method in another context? Because VBI has been developed for IT technology, for software or perhaps hardware, but for IT. And cultivated meat is not IT. So it's quite a different technology and also different kinds of players. And I thought, well, let's try. Let's try what we can do about it. We have to adjust it. We cannot take it one-to-one, but we can use very much follow in big steps what the standard and VBI is recommending.
Right. So in value-based engineering, you have these three phases of assessment. You have the concept and context exploration, then you have ethical values elicitation, and then finally ethical aligned design.
Yes.
So I'd like to just break that down and go in each step. So could you explain how you did the concept and context exploration of cultured meat?
We did that together with also partners with had been specifically responsible with generating kind persona profiles, different kinds of stakeholders who would be somehow involved in this topic. We looked at the literature and we made, of course, our own thoughts. We just thought about the issues. And the exciting thing is, we do have to look at different kinds of people who would be affected by the technology. First, of course, consumers. People who like to eat meat and people who don't eat meat. They would be also affected. But also, of course, for example, farmers. They make their living by raising up animals. So what would be the effect? Could be positive, but also, of course, negative on the economic security, etc. But there would be also people like what it's a further step of thinking about it. What about religious people who have specific food laws, like Jewish people, Muslims or so. Would that be seen as kosher, for example? Huh? Very interesting. And how would they, what just would be the impact on those kind of communities? But above all, the questions of different human segments or sectors of people, we of course have to look into animals. What would be the effect on the animals? Yeah? And in addition, what would be the effect on nature as a whole, and also on plants? So it's a huge topic on different kinds of stakeholders, which we all have to have in mind.
And so during the concept and context like exploration, was there anything that surprised you or that shocked you when you were doing this first phase of VBE that you didn't expect?
One example. What about the secondary products made out of animals, like leather or pharmaceuticals, etc.? What would be the effect on the availability on the market if we use less animals for our consumption? What would be the effect on those producers of secondary products and things like that? What would be the effect on our cultural landscape? I mean, there are landscapes for cattle, for example, which are huge and not very nice but for example, in Austria, I mean, we have the Alps and Almen and things like that, which are actually part of our culture. And if we don't have animals, it would change. In which, for the good, for the bad. So there are many effects which you wouldn't think automatically at the first hand, which you have to consider. What are the effects? What in addition is very complex, comparing to, let's say, I wouldn't say classical, because you can't say classical VBE project, but let's say an VBE project, like it's thought about in the method, is you would talk with a company designing a new product, bringing on the market, and that would be your partner in VBE project. The company, of course, has then third parties for system of systems, as it's named in VBE, because usually you cannot build a new software from scratch. You have to use servers and apps from other providers, etc., interfaces, data streams, all that. But still, there's one responsible partner for your VBE project. The company designing and developing a new product or service. In cultivated meat, there are hundreds of actors, more or less independent, which are involved in this kind. These are from the farmer over the farmers which are producing actually the feed and not the animals, via bioreactor producers, media producers, all the distribution, production, consummation, hundreds of different actors involved in. And of course, the regulatory level, which actually is the question how it will develop further in this topic. And that's part of our project, to get more clearer evidence for the regulatory authorities. How should we consider those topics, and what should we do about them?
So the effect of then the context exploration was that was finding that the structure of the different organizations involved and the different stakeholders weren't the same as an IT organization, effectively.
Yes, and
It was much more individualized.
much more individual, and yeah, I mean, it's like a complete. It's an industry, and it's the traditional industry of meat production and consumption and wholesale and everything what is involved, and in addition a future complete infrastructure of cultivated meat production and delivery and consumption, etc. So it's not like it's an infrastructure. It's not a company. Yeah.
And then, so to go from the first stage of the concept and context exploration into the second phase of the values elicitation, how did you do that with all these different stakeholders involved?
Yeah, we approach it from 3 different levels. So on the one hand, literature work. We just screened for literature considering ethical issues around cultivated meat. And then we conducted interviews with specific experts around specific questions. And then we conducted workshops, stakeholder workshops, and those were very close. Well, actually, one of them was very close, like it is recommended from VBI. So really getting into the 3 different angles of moral philosophy and hand out this kind of tables which stakeholders would fill out. What could be the benefits? What could be the risk? Which values would be involved? And that we did over actually 18 months. It was a lot of work, and then we put everything together. We consolidated all the information and wrote a report about it. And that's the interim ethical impact assessment report. And it includes, as you have said, step 1 and step 2 of the VBI method. Not so much step 3, which will come. I mean, there are some parts of it looking into potential recommendations, etc., but it's still, we have to work on it.
And so in this report, you identified several different values.
Yeah.
So if I could maybe start with the first value you identify as animal welfare.
Yeah.
How did you analyze that then in terms of value qualities, and then breaking that further down into value dispositions?
Yeah, we looked into it, which value qualities would be relevant for the context of cultivated meat.
And maybe if I could start, how did you first come up with animal welfare as a value?
Yeah.
As a core value?
Yeah. In the end, we have 8 core values, and one of them is animal welfare. And we have looked into the literature and just talked with colleagues also from the Feasts project, of course, and on conferences with other from other institutions. And it's quite straightforward. 3 or 4 core values are quite straightforward because we call them ethical drivers. They're actually the purpose or the original purpose why we try to even get to a cultivated meat, which is animal welfare, which is ecological sustainability, which is health, as I've mentioned before, and which is food security or food justice. Those are the 4 ethical drivers we have identified in our talks in literature and what we have found, with the stakeholder workshops. So here we could say, well, fine, these are all really very positive goals. So we just have to clarify, is it realistic that cultivated meat really realizes fosters those core values. And that's the question. It's not clear. I mean, it depends then on the value qualities. Yeah? So we defined the value qualities really going through all the arguments and looking into them and what is the value quality. I think per core value we defined about 10 value qualities. Exactly. And so on the one hand is the question, would it be realized? On the other hand is the question, are there potential side effects which we don't like? And therefore, you also have to look in addition to additional core values, not just the ethical drivers, but additional, how could be the effect? And then we found and identified in addition 4 additional core values, which are trust, integrity, social cohesion, and economic security. So, and that is actually so much what I like about the specific terminology of VBE. What are core values? What are value qualities? What are value dispositions? But usually they're mixed up in dialogue or in discussions. And so you're throwing apples and pears at each other, and it's unclear what actually, how the argument is, what's the... Usually the result is often quite a misunderstanding between different parties. And actually that's actually going on also on the political landscape. There are proponents, very much proponents of cultivated meat, and there are opponents. And of course, I mean, farmer as a first impression could say, we don't want it. It's not our product. We have produced animals for centuries. But the question, for example, is, could farmers transform in future to producers of cultivated meat, which at the first hand seems, well, that's strange. I mean, farmers living with animals and not like lab engineers or so. But if you're looking closer, it's like, for example, a producer of beer is doing similar things. Like they have bioreactors and they get the material from the fields, and so it's not so or an Weinbauer, yeah, it's not so different, yeah. So but anyhow, there could be, of course, side effects, and that we have to clarify. How is the composition between potential positive effects and potential negative effects? How do they relate to each other? And in the end effect, the major questions are, how can we mitigate potential negative side effects?
Mm-hmm. So you identified these 8 core values.
Yes.
And then, so under these core values, you then have the value qualities.
Yes.
Which are the more kind of applied effects of the core values.
Yeah, it's how would the core value really realize in this specific context? If I say animal welfare, you say, okay, animal welfare, fine. But how can you realize animal welfare? There are so many different aspects of animal welfare. You could say, well, it should be a nice stable. There should be a nice stable for the animals, for the cattle. Or they should have the right temperature, or they should get the right food, or they shouldn't get too many medicine or whatever. They shouldn't feel pain. These are all aspects of animal welfare. So which aspects are relevant for cultivated meat? Like, for example, you would reduce mass slaughtering if there would be animal cultivated meat and would be consumed, because you don't need so many anymore.
And so once you break down the core values into how they're realized in the value qualities, that's still a very abstract level. That's not, those aren't concrete suggestions of how you go about cultivating this meat. So that then brings us on to then the third dimension, the value dispositions. How did you then break down those value qualities of health, the animal-friendly stable, and the feeding? What were then the dispositions that you derive from that?
Well, we have the challenge that it's a moving field and developing, and many things are not known yet. And therefore, this project is here. And what we are lucky in is that we do have very sophisticated partners within the project, which are specifically working on specific issues, like looking at the environmental impact of cultivated meat, conducting life cycle assessments, for example, looking at the health issues, what could be negative health issues, what could be positive, etc., etc. So, and the results of their work will help us to understand better the value dispositions. It's actually too early that we can define them, but we have to work together with our colleagues within feasts, getting to that information. We are like more on the meta level, understanding the complete picture, you could say, with all the different core values, value qualities, and then down to the value dispositions. There have to be specific groups working exactly on this. And then we will communicate and what have you found and how can we integrate this into our VBE analysis.
Because in the report, so under the animal welfare, under the value qualities, as value dispositions, you've got listed flooring, space in meters squared, and temperature.
It's just an example.
These are examples, but they're
just examples to understand the three-tier value terminology.
Right.
Yeah.
So as it were, those are categories or those are items that need to be determined in the next step of analysis.
Exactly.
But they are more concrete, as it were, as opposed to the kind of different degrees of abstraction with the value qualities and then the core values.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have to understand what we have to look at, and then we have to look at what after we understood what we have to look at. So that is our work, what we have to look at and not overlook something. That is very important. And then we look into the specific results of projects and further literature and things like that on very concrete specific topics. We are looking at the interrelation between the core values, value qualities, and so on. The value disposition, we have to get this information of colleagues who are really working in that very specifically in that topic.
Mm. Yeah. And how was the elicitation of values shaped by the ethical frameworks of utilitarianism, duty ethics, and virtue ethics, for example?
Virtue ethics is some kind of a challenge. Yeah? What does it mean in this context? We had to think about it, because I mean, in the context it has been looked at from VBE, from my point of view, it's quite obvious why digital technology can also have a negative effect on your virtues or have an accelerating effect on your vices. Yeah, don't have to be, but I mean, many people are addicted, and that's not a virtue; it's a vice. On social media, etc., or misinformation, you name it. That's not so straightforward with cultivated meat. Could there be a negative effect on your kind of virtue, vice character? And so we broadened it a little bit. How could it be an effect on your integrity, on like what we realized is many people like to eat meat. I do eat meat, for example. They like the taste and they like also the culture around it. But actually, if you look more detail, what's happening with the animals and how they are treated, you really get a bad feeling about it. So you are in a tension, in an inner tension between what you're doing and what you think is right is not corresponding, overlapping 100%. So could it be a positive effect if you eat meat which you like the taste from, but you don't have to kill animals for yourself? So it's not like virtue in a narrow sense, but it has an effect on your character, and I would say on your cohesion, internal cohesion. And so that we looked at with this kind of virtue ethics frame. What would be the effect on you as an individual consumer? Not what would be the effect on nature, what would be the effect on animals, what would be the effect on economy, but you as a consumer. And there could be also, of course, negative effects, which we would say, for example, further alienation from nature. What you're eating, still meat, but there is no animal. I mean, of course, the source had been an animal with the stem cell, but I mean, perhaps also these kind of small farms could vanish, which we still like going with our kids for vacation on a farm, things like that, meeting the cows and the chickens and the goats. I mean, what would be the effect on the relationship between humans, consumers, and animals, like domestic animals?
Yeah.
Would it be only positive? Like we say, yeah, we do have horses nowadays. We don't eat them, but we ride them and things like that. And we don't use them for carrying our cars. So, but I think it's not clear. It's not clear the effect, and we really have to consider it thoroughly. What could be the positive and what could be the negative effects? And once we have an understanding of potential negative effects, of further understanding, or we have results from our analysis, what to do about them with ethical value requirements, how to reduce negative effects. That the further steps which we will work on in the next 18 months. Yeah.
And so then the final phase of value-based engineering is the ethically aligned design.
Yeah.
And you said that the report only really focuses on the first two phases.
The current report, we will have in the next report.
Yeah. Could you say what you expect, or what we could maybe anticipate from this third phase?
Yeah.
Are there any early indications of how this could be applied?
Yeah, as I've said, it's quite obvious what the potential benefits could be of cultivated meat. So it's at least as important to look at the potential side effects which are not wished, negative side effects, and what to do about it. And what to do about it in our context means it could be technical requirements, or organizational, but also politically. Like I've said, you could put a regulation that this kind of market power for a few companies addressing the complete market is not possible, and things like that. So we will, in the next step, we will look at all core values again and look what are the potential negative effects, and clarify specific recommendations, how to handle them, and how to mitigate those potential side effects with specific measures. And this could be, as I've said, technical, organizational, or political.
Well, thank you, Lukas.